In today's video, we'll be looking at the horrific last moments of zookeepers who lost their lives to the very animals they cared for, from a bull elephant in India to a black bear in the frozen forests of Canada. But first, in Texas, a senior keeper's routine with a lion became his final act. It was July 19, 2013. The aging wildlife park outside Houston showed its wear in the hot summer sun. Michael Turner was 44 years old. He had worked with big cats for over 15 years. The other workers said he was calm and careful. He always looked out for his team and the animals. Turner could have taken jobs at bigger, newer places, but he stayed at this park. He felt like the animals were his job to protect. The park was old and didn't have much money. Turner knew the risks of his work, but he trusted what he had learned over the years. That summer, the park hired a new worker. Turner was teaching him the job. Turner liked to show new people how things worked by going into the animal areas with them. He thought this was better than just watching from outside. On this day, he wanted to show the new worker how to feed Kuma, a male lion that weighed 450 pounds. The workers had been talking about a broken gate latch all week. People on the radio said the gate would sometimes get stuck. Turner had heard this. He knew about it, but he had visitors watching and a new worker to train, so he kept going with his plan. The wildlife park looked run down. The wooden fences were old and weathered. The steel mesh fencing sagged in some spots. Tall grass grew wild near the walking paths. The lion areas were large, but relied on outdated sliding mesh gates. Every latch had to be closed by hand, and the mechanisms often stuck or scraped against their frames. That afternoon was very hot. The sun beat down on the gravel paths and metal fencing. Maintenance workers stood by a shed, watching the animal keepers work. Cicadas buzzed loudly in the heat. Lions are built to kill. Males can weigh over 400 pounds. Their paws can crush bones. Their jaws can crack skulls. In zoos, they can live for many years, but they never lose their wild instincts. Even when they seem calm around people they know, lions can turn violent without warning. They react fast to sounds, smells, or anything different in their routine. Kuma had been fed thousands of times before, but the danger was always there. There were warning signs before Turner went into the enclosure. Kuma was walking back and forth along the fence. His tail was twitching. He was watching the workers outside. The new keeper saw that the gate was hard to close when Turner pulled it, but he didn't say anything. When Turner closed the gate behind him, it made a grinding metal sound. The latch didn't slide fully into place. Workers nearby would later say they saw the gate shift slightly when the lion pushed against it. Even with these warning signs, Turner kept going. He started to move Kuma toward a smaller holding area. This should have been a normal, safe job. The attack happened fast. As Turner was guiding the lion with hand signals, Kuma jumped forward. He pushed through the weak gate with sudden force. People watching heard the steel frame rattle and the heavy sound of the lion hitting Turner in the chest. The keeper fell backward and was pinned down right away. The new worker yelled for help, but his voice shook and he froze when he saw what was happening. Maintenance workers grabbed metal tools and hit them against the fence. The loud, clanging sounds rang out across the park. Kuma roared. It was a deep sound that carried through the area and covered up Turner's cries. On the ground, the fight was short but terrible. Kuma's paws pressed into Turner's shoulders. His claws tore through Turner's shirt and into his shoulders. The lion's jaws clamped down on Turner's torso, shaking him hard against the gravel. People watching said dust came up from the gravel as the two bodies rolled together. Turner tried to protect himself. He pushed against the lion's face, but the weight was too much. His legs kicked weakly as blood spread under him. The air filled with roaring, people shouting, and the hollow sound of workers hitting steel bars. The attack went on for minutes that felt much longer to the people watching. They tried to get Kuma's attention, but failed. The animal stayed focused on Turner. Finally, Turner's movements got slower. His body went still under the lion's grip. The new keeper was pale and shaking. Staff had to pull him back because they were afraid he might try to run to the gate. Kuma only let go of Turner when more workers came with fire hoses. They sprayed water through the bars. The lion stepped away slowly, walking back and forth with water dripping from his mane. Turner lay without moving. Emergency workers were called right away, but there was nothing they could do when they got there. Turner was dead at the scene. His uniform was ripped. The gravel around him was stained dark red. His keys and radio were scattered near the bent gate. The new keeper was shaking and couldn't stop. He was taken to the hospital and treated for shock. Maintenance workers stayed for hours, giving their stories to investigators. Their clothes were still wet from the hose spray. The park closed for 6 months. Investigators said the broken equipment and old safety rules caused the accident. Turner's funeral was quiet in his hometown. No cameras were there, just family and a few other animal keepers came. Local newspapers wrote about it briefly, but the story didn't spread much beyond the area. Kuma was not killed. He was moved to a more secure place with stricter rules. The tragedy in Texas showed how a single weak gate could end a life in seconds. But halfway across the world, a veteran keeper in India would face an even heavier force, one he had trusted for decades. It was August 23, 2014. The rural zoo outside Thrissur, Kerala was busy with festival week crowds, and the morning heat pressed down on the concrete elephant wash area. Ramesh Pillai was 52 years old and had worked with elephants his whole life. He started as a teenager, helping his uncle. Other workers knew him as patient and careful. He liked to keep things neat and follow the same routines every day. Ramesh lived nearby with his wife. His grown son sometimes helped out on busy days. He preferred quiet work over big shows. He kept his tools organized and his schedule tight. The other staff trusted him to make good choices when they were short on workers. Festival week meant more visitors and less time between groups. Ramesh was told to wash Suraj, an 8,000-pound bull elephant. He thought this would be easier than moving the animal or doing a public feeding. Junior keepers would watch and then practice under his guidance. He had handled Suraj on difficult days before. The elephant seemed to respond well to him. With a break between school groups, he planned to finish fast and clear the area before the next crowd came. The wash area was a concrete rectangle that sloped toward a drain. It had a low wall on one side and steel bars on the other. Algae made the floor slippery near the drain where the hose often leaked. From the barrier 20 feet away, visitors could see everything clearly. The steel chain around the elephant's right leg, the buckets lined up, the stiff brush in Ramesh's hand, the water valve by the wall. The air smelled of wet dirt, soap, and elephant dung. Asian bull elephants are huge and move fast for their size. Adult males stand 8 to 9 feet tall at the shoulder and often weigh 6,000 to 10,000 pounds, with the largest bulls reaching even more. A trunk can lift hundreds of pounds. A foot can press thousands of pounds of force into a small spot. Male elephants go through a condition called musth. This brings hormone changes, gland discharge, and a shorter temper. Training helps reduce risk, but it doesn't remove wild instincts. A handler's safety depends on good footing, working equipment, and enough space. There were warning signs. Weeks before, Suraj had shown signs of musth. By this week, those signs had gotten better, but he was still restless. His tail would snap and his head would go up when crowds got loud. That morning, a junior keeper said the chain latch sometimes got stuck. He also said algae near the drain made the floor slick. Ramesh checked the latch and heard it click into place. He decided to go ahead with his routine. He weighed the schedule and the elephant's calmer mood against the small risks he thought he could handle. The first few minutes went as planned. Ramesh worked along the left shoulder and behind the ears. He stayed close to the wall where he could turn quickly if the animal moved. Suraj flapped his ears and rocked from side to side. A few visitors leaned against the viewing barrier to take phone pictures. When the water pressure dropped, a loose loop of hose slid over Ramesh's boot. He turned to reach the valve. At that moment, Suraj stepped forward. He pulled tight against the chain until a link rode higher on the post and changed the angle. The setup of the area changed. The chain lifted just enough for Suraj to bring his head closer. The trunk curved low and then rose up, wrapping around Ramesh at the waist. People behind the barrier heard the brush hit the concrete and the heavy sound of a shoulder hitting the wall. Suraj trumpeted. It was a hard sound that filled the area and bounced off the roof as the crowd's talking turned into overlapping shouts. Suraj swung him and drove him into the wall again. Ramesh slid to the wet floor. The elephant put his right foot across his pelvis and lower abdomen, pinning him down. Concrete chipped at the edge of the drain under the weight. The trunk pressed across his chest, forcing his back to the floor as the foot shifted and pressed down harder. Junior keepers grabbed a steel bar and hit the the chain to distract the bull. Another worker opened the valve fully. A hard stream of water washed over the elephant's head and shoulders but had no effect. The pressure became slower and more deliberate. The foot lifted and came down again, higher toward the chest, the weight settling with crushing force. The concrete area made every sound louder. Scraping footpads, the rush of water, the trumpet's boom, the dull crack as bones broke. Ramesh's legs moved once and then went still. His keys slid across the floor into the drain. Other handlers came with a pole and tried to push the trunk away. Suraj moved toward them, giving a little slack. One man dragged Ramesh a foot before the trunk tightened across his upper body and pushed him back. The chain made creaking sounds but held. Another hose blasted the side of the elephant's head. Suraj stood over the still body, breathing hard. A worn tusk scraped the wall. The vet ran in from the service gate with a dart gun and aimed at the shoulder. The first dart hit high and stuck at an angle. It took several minutes for the drug to calm the elephant. Suraj's swaying got wider and the pressure eased slowly. The junior workers pulled Ramesh clear and tried to help him on the wet concrete. His shirt was torn and soaked. He didn't respond. Medics reached the side road and moved him to a stretcher. They kept trying to help him in the truck, then stopped. Staff stood along the fence, clothes wet from the water spray, watching the empty area as a hose kept running. By evening, the bent latch on the chain post was fixed. Investigators took pictures of chipped concrete near the drain and scrape marks along the wall. The zoo closed for several days, then reopened with fewer demonstrations and stricter rules for the wash area. Captive animals don't always need brute strength to take a life. Sometimes it's a sliver of opportunity measured in inches. One such moment came when a tiger forced its way past a door that should have held. It was May 10th, 2015. The zoo in Leipzig, Germany, was busy with Sunday crowds who lined the bridge over the tiger habitat to watch the feeding. Hans Becker was 39 years old and worked as a mid-level keeper. He had 2 young children and was known for being neat and steady. He arrived before dawn and kept his boots and paperwork clean. Other workers trusted his notes and his ability to spot small changes in the animals. His experience also made him work faster. When the public schedule was tight, he sometimes skipped checking locks twice if they felt right the first time. He trusted the feel of the equipment and the sound of a door closing properly. This Sunday, he planned to place meat at a hidden door while families watched from above. His plan was simple: place the food, seal the door, check it, then signal that it was ready. The tiger area was shaped like a shallow bowl with sand and grass. It was surrounded by a water moat and stone ledges. Water pumps hummed behind a small waterfall. From the bridge, visitors could see the striped cats and then watch them disappear behind the rocks. Tigers are built to hunt by surprise with quick, deadly force. Adult males often reach 9 feet from nose to tail and weigh over 400 pounds. Their front legs are powerful enough to break bones with a single swipe. Their jaws can crack bones. In zoos, they learn routines, but they still react strongly at doorways and feeding spots. There were warning signs. Earlier that week, maintenance workers wrote down that the northeast door was dragging slightly. It would close, but the bottom edge needed a harder push. The schedule was rushed because of an extra school group. Hans decided the door felt good enough to use. Before feeding time, the male tiger named Raja was pacing in the back area. His tail tip was twitching, and his ears were forward. 2 staff members stood nearby with radios, while parents lifted children onto the rail to see better. Hans carried a bucket into the corridor and slid open the inside panel. He set the meat on the ledge. The sliding panel came back, but it stuck in the last inch of track. He bumped it with his shoulder until it thudded shut, then turned toward the outer door. He misjudged the closure by just a little bit. The inside panel had not fully locked into its bottom track. This left a thin gap where the seal should have been tight. When Hans let go of the outer door, Raja pushed from the other side. The panel lifted slightly in its track, just enough for the claws to hook the edge. Metal made ticking sounds against metal. The gap got wider. Visitors saw a blur of orange and black stripes. Raja's front half cleared the door opening in one powerful movement that shook the frame. Hans turned to run back, but had only 2 steps of corridor and a wall behind him. The tiger hit him high, slamming him into the wall. The bucket rolled and stopped against the doorway. Hans fell on one hip. The tiger's weight came down on top of him, front paws pinning his shoulders. Claws tore through his clothes and skin, Raja moved lower and bit down on the left side of his body. The shaking that followed was short and violent. On the bridge, people cried out in voices that mixed with the sound of the water pumps. Hans tried to push at the tiger's face, then at the lower jaw. His movements were small under the heavy weight. Raja dragged him against the door edge, inch by inch. Radios crackled. One keeper ran for blank cartridges. Another grabbed the manual winch handle. Parents pulled their children down and backed away from the rail. The first blanks fired, sharp and flat inside the corridor. Raja flinched but did not let go. Another pair cracked. The tiger bit again higher near the shoulder and pressed Hans onto his back. His boots scraped against the floor. A keyring slid and stopped near the wall. The door crew began working the winch, pulling the slider slowly to trap the tiger back in the run, but the alignment was off with Hans's body caught at the edge. A keeper shoved a pole through the gap to push Raja's head aside. Another blank cracked. Raja shifted just enough for the winch to gain another inch. The steel door moved forward against the frame with a grinding sound. The fight got shorter with jerks and growls. Hans's breathing was shallow and wet. The door moved closer as staff worked the winch handle. One more blank fired, and Raja pulled back into the run. The door slammed shut with a final clank. When it was safe, two keepers pulled Hans clear. He wasn't responding. His shirt was torn across the left chest and stomach. Blood had soaked through the fabric. A broken radio lay by his hip. Visitors were moved off the bridge while medics worked on the corridor floor. The pump noise was suddenly loud without people's voices. Officials arrived within minutes, followed by the vet team. Raja was given drugs to make him sleep and moved to another pen. The floor showed scrape marks at the door, a smear across the threshold, and a circular mark from the spinning bucket. Hans was pronounced dead at the scene. The zoo put out a statement the next day and added a small memorial plaque near the tiger exhibit. After the gate-slipped incident, another tragedy showed that danger isn't always about steel or locks. Sometimes the real threat comes from the animals themselves. What began as routine work quickly spiraled into something no one on the grounds would ever forget. It was March 4th, 2017. The zoo in Johannesburg, South Africa, was busy with warm afternoon tours as school children leaned over railings near the primate house. David Mokoena was 47 years old and had worked with chimpanzees for many years. He grew up a few miles from the zoo. He liked quiet teaching better than big shows. He would walk school groups through behavior notes and point out the difference between young chimps playing and adult displays. He wrote down more details than required and called in small repairs that others ignored. He would come back after closing to make sure water lines were turned off. The staff was short that week. One keeper was out sick, and another was helping move a giraffe to a different zoo, so David took on transfer duties that usually needed 2 people. He agreed to do it because student tours were backed up, and he wanted to keep the feeding and cleaning on schedule. His plan was simple: move 2 chimps into holding pens, clear the main area, then come back to give a short talk to a visiting researcher and an intern. The chimp area was shaped like an L, with connected rooms and runs. A concrete transfer corridor linked the night dens to the island exhibit. Heavy doors slid up and down in steel channels. Red catch latches sat at waist height, where hands should go. A squeeze pen opened from the far end for medical checks. From the public window, the tour group could not see the corridor itself. They could only hear steel hitting steel and the sound of chimps walking on plywood flooring. Chimpanzees are small, but very strong. Adult males usually weigh 90 to 130 pounds. Their arms can pull their body weight hand over hand and pull a person off balance in 1 second. Their hands are built for gripping and tearing. Their teeth can cut through skin and muscle. In groups, they work together and can go from curious to angry when something sets them off. Living in zoos creates routines, but doesn't change their wild instincts, especially around doorways, food, and crowded viewing windows. There were warning signs. For 2 days, a teenage male had acted up when crowds pressed against the glass. He would slap and bounce off the mesh. That morning, the radio carried a reminder to keep double barriers and get a clear view before stepping past a checkpoint. With fewer staff around, David told the intern to keep keep the students at the window while he managed the chimps in the corridor alone. He brought the first chimp into the transfer lane with food and closed the den behind it. Normally, he would pause and check the lock twice, but noise from the viewing area pulled his attention. A group of students had pressed against the glass, shouting and banging despite the guide's warnings. David turned his head for a second to wave them back. In that moment, the teenage male in the back lunged, shoving against the door before it fully seated. The frame rattled. Metal rang. The chimp's shoulders slipped through the gap, and two more followed in a rush. One became four in seconds, as two females and another young chimp pushed through the opening. Screams from the tour group got louder and turned into steady noise. Inside the corridor, the chimps filled the space, trapping David against a door he could not open without letting them reach the public side. He braced a foot against the doorframe and tried to keep his hands away from their mouths, but the first hit knocked him off balance. A second strike took him to the floor. The attack came in bursts. A hand grabbed his wrist and twisted. Another chimp stamped his arm against the concrete. Teeth found his shoulder and upper arm. He pulled one hand free and tried to cover his throat. His feet slipped on dust as the animals circled around him. The sounds were shrieks, heavy breathing, skin scraping on concrete, and the hollow clang of a door that would not close. The intern grabbed small stones from a planter just outside the visitor path and threw them through the open service window toward the corridor, not to hit the animals but to startle them. Stones bounced and scattered. The researcher shouted into the radio for help and began moving students back down the path. A keeper at the far door started getting sedation drugs ready. The primate supervisor ran with a dart gun from the clinic. David rolled toward the squeeze pen, using the wall for support. A female bit his leg and dragged him back. The teenage male hit his face and pulled at his fingers. Blood pooled under his arm and left a short trail where he had been dragged. He got to one knee and then fell again as three bodies pressed in and beat down with open hands and fists. The lead keeper reached the corridor window, aimed, and fired a dart into the largest male's thigh. The animal jumped and spun, tearing the dart loose and throwing it against the wall. A second dart stuck. After a minute, the male's movements got slower. The others turned to the glass, slapping and bouncing while staff slammed a barrier between the public window and the corridor. The outside noise dropped. Inside, the shrieks continued. One female climbed to the top of the frame and dropped onto David's body, knocking air from his lungs. Another gripped his hair and slammed his head sideways into the floor. The lead keeper moved forward with a riot shield, wedged it between the animals, and dragged David by his belt while the drugs began to work. The teenage male's hits got slower. A third dart found a shoulder. The corridor settled to heavy breathing and low sounds. Medics came in as soon as the last animal fell down and was tied with straps. David's sleeves were torn apart. His arms showed deep cuts and crush injuries. His face and head showed deep cuts. He did not respond to voices. They worked on him on the floor, then moved him to a stretcher and out a service gate to an ambulance waiting by the staff parking lot. By evening, the corridor had been photographed and cleaned. A shoe lay by the door with its lace broken. A radio with a cracked antenna sat under a bench. Security closed the viewing window until new locks could be put on the catch points. David was pronounced dead at the hospital. That week, school children came back to place flowers at the front gates and leave drawings of chimps taped to the fence. New rules required a second person to check every barrier and banned single-person transfers in that corridor. The primate attack was filled with noise and panic. The next case unfolded in Ontario, where silence and snow swallowed nearly everything. And it started with something so small it should never have mattered. It was January 12th, 2018. The Wildlife Rescue Center in northern Ontario sat quiet under deep snow, with frost covering the enclosures and the hum of a diesel generator carrying through the cold air. Paul Henderson was 41 years old. He had worked at the private rescue for over 10 years, taking care of black bears that had been brought in as orphaned cubs or moved from roadside attractions. He was a quiet man who lived alone in a small cabin on the property. Other workers said he was dependable and gentle with animals. He rarely raised his voice even when they tested his patience. He was known for forming bonds with bears others found difficult. He had raised Shadow, a male black bear, from a cub after its mother was killed by hunters. The two had shared more than 15 years in the same area. Winter work was slower, but more dangerous. Bears did not fully sleep at the center, waking up for feedings during mild weather. Paul usually worked with another keeper for feeding, but staff shortages left him working alone that morning. He didn't complain. He was used to taking on extra work when others were sick or roads were closed by snow. His goal was to move quickly through the routine before a contractor crew arrived to work on new fencing. He carried the feed bucket himself, as he had done many times. The bare area stretched across an acre of frozen ground. Snow piled high against the mesh fencing, and heavy wooden posts were capped with ice. A den opening, built up with timbers, led underground where Shadow spent most of the winter. Outside the den, the surface was packed with snow and marked with animal tracks. Frost hung from tree branches above. The air smelled faintly of diesel and feed from the prep shed. Black bears are smaller than grizzly bears, but still powerful. Adult males can weigh anywhere from 300 to 600 pounds. Their strength is more than enough to overpower a person. Their bite force can split bone. Despite their size, they move with surprising speed, covering short distances in seconds. In captivity, they learn feeding routines but remain wild, especially when upset or when smells confuse their instincts. A bear's sense of smell is one of the sharpest in the animal kingdom. They can detect odors from miles away. There were warning signs. Shadow had been restless for weeks, disturbed repeatedly by staff clearing snow off the den roof and by generators running longer than usual. Another keeper had noted his pacing at odd hours and suggested being careful. Paul knew this, but he trusted his bond with the animal. That morning, he had also handled fish for other areas and carried the smell on his gloves and sleeve. He didn't change gear before moving to Shadow's pen. For years, he had entered with the same clothing and never had a problem. Paul opened the gate with the feed bucket and stepped onto the hard-packed snow. Shadow came out of the den, moving low, his head swinging side to side. The bear paused, sniffed the air, and focused on Paul's left arm instead of the bucket. People who saw it later said the bear's body language changed the moment he smelled the fabric. Paul set the bucket down near the usual feeding spot, but Shadow went past it completely, heading straight toward him. The charge was sudden. Snow crunched under heavy paws as the bear closed the short distance. Paul raised one arm, but Shadow struck high, knocking him backward onto the snow. The first bite clamped onto his shoulder, shaking him hard against the frozen ground. Paul cried out once, muffled under the sound of deep growls. His boots scraped against ice as he tried to twist free. A co-worker arriving late with tools heard shouting and ran toward the pen. From outside the fence, he saw Paul pinned down, Shadow's jaws locked onto his upper body. Blood stained the snow in dark patches that spread quickly. Paul's free hand pushed weakly at the bear's head, but the weight pressing into his chest left little room to move. Construction workers at a nearby building grabbed metal sheets and slammed them against a truck bed. The sharp banging echoed through the woods, mixing with shouted voices. Shadow barely reacted, dragging Paul a few feet toward the den entrance. The bear's growls were deep, rising with each pull. Paul's movements slowed. His arm, once pushing, went still against the snow. The co-worker yelled into his radio for help, trying to distract the animal by hitting the fence posts with a crowbar. The sound carried, but Shadow stayed locked on, pressing down with his front legs and shaking Paul again near the den opening. Snow sprayed up around them. Paul's jacket tore open, his sleeve dark with blood. Wildlife officers reached the area within minutes, but by then Paul was not moving. A rifle was raised, then lowered in favor of darts, but Shadow's position over the body made a clear shot difficult. The decision was made quickly. A shot rang out across the area. The bear fell near the den, heavy in the snow. The officers entered and pulled Paul free, but there were no signs of life. By evening, the ground had been cleared. The blood-stained snow was shoveled away, and the feed bucket picked up, still half full. Paul's torn gloves were collected as evidence. A broken watch lay in the trampled snow near the gate. Paul's body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered on a nearby forest trail he had often walked alone. Shadow was put down at the scene. Local newspapers ran brief stories, calling it a tragic reminder of the risks of working with wild animals. At the rescue, a simple wooden sign was placed near the bear area with Paul's name carved into it. Thanks for watching. If you're ready, the next encounter is waiting on the end screen, only on Animal Encounters.